Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week was pretty interesting, as CCP has done another experiment for a day without downtime. And in fact, things, well, let's going to assume went so well that they extended the downtime the next day by a couple of hours, pushing it into basically my time of playing EVE Online. So after work, I basically had to, wait a little bit and see exactly when downtime was planned. I think it's a very interesting experiment. It could really change EVE Online quite significantly. Lots of things are currently centered around downtime, especially the moving of super capitals and very large and expensive assets and things like that, because with downtime that basically your ship is going to get out of a situation that it could be in at that time. And so a lot of activity does revolve around that, which makes it less risky to do these kinds of things. And then of course we also have the resource situation, which I think it's interesting that CCP is starting these experiments again, or doing the second experiment with Q4 in mind, where we should have the end of scarcity. I personally am expecting some more dynamic systems when it comes to the resource distribution of things, and that should mean that those also become less dependent on downtime, for instance for the respawning of ores and things like that. So very interesting experiment. I think it went well. I hope that CCP got a lot of interesting data out of it, and that they can keep working on this. The less downtime we get in EVE Online, the cooler I think the sandbox will become eventually. For me personally, for my experience, while I did just quickly log on just before the downtime to see how things were going, it all felt quite alright. So I didn't really notice any real problems with the delayed downtime either. Just did a little bit of exploration before and around that, and everything felt quite normal. So I would say that from my end, it looks like EVE Online held up quite well to that downtime experiment from CCP. We don't know a lot about the other development for the game, so I am really curious as to any news that CCP will bring out. We do know, of course, that the new player experience should be coming this month, in the month of September, but after that, well, it's all still up in the air as to what CCP is planning for the next quadrant for Q3, because it's only in Q4 that we know that we should get the end of scarcity. So let's keep an eye on the news. It could be interesting. Next up, a quick look at the New Eden store. As always, let's see, a couple of bundles. Do we still have some new? Nope, no skins marked as new. So this is just pretty much the regular way that we have the skins and stuff, and the services, nothing special to report there. Alright, that means we move on to the market, and we're going to start with some plex and stuff at 330. Like that. Okay, let's go. And you may already have seen it from the ticker, but plex is slowly continuing its ascent, and sellers are getting very close to that average price of 2.7 million, getting to another high point, which the market doesn't really seem to be all that willing to just break through and keep going up, which is pretty interesting. A little bit of hesitation has been seen the last couple of times that we reached this price range. We can see here in GTA itself almost 2.7 million for the sellers, but the buyers are up above 2.6 million as well. Pretty narrow margin, only like 60,000 ISK between sellers and buyers. That is not a lot for plex. If you go to the player owned trade hubs, I think that it was 3 months, so a full quarter, that we're going to have the lower taxes, and perhaps CCP is going to extend that. I don't know. I do think a lot of players are all for it. It does incentivize more trade. But GTA is clearly still dominating the trade of plex at the moment, with only a couple of sellers in the Tranquility Trading Tower here and there. Then we have the multiple pilot training certificates that are basically flat but above the 1.3 billion mark, which I think is pretty important as well for, let's say, an above average price and potentially that upwards pressure. You can also see that the downwards spikes are getting lower and lower, and that now on this last little downtrend just in the last week, we just could not go back below 1.3 billion ISK. It's 1.32 to 1.3, well, actually getting to 1.4 very quickly with the sellers, and those buyers are just touching that 1.3 billion already. Again, if you look at the cheapest seller, 132 against the cheapest buyer, 129, that's only a less than 30 million ISK margin between sellers and buyers, which is of course nothing for something that costs over a billion ISK. So that upwards pressure does seem to be here for now, although we don't see an increase in price, in average prices, that's that dramatic on the chart compared to what's happening with Plex at the moment. Skill extractors should be following Plex quite closely, and here we are back well above 300 million ISK, although we're still a ways away from the 310 high point that corresponds with the 2.7 million for Plex itself. So skill extractors going up to 303 million for the sellers, again 297 million for the first buyer. You can see here 297, 296.8, that just definitely stays in that range for quite a few buy orders. So there is this upwards pressure from buyers that have closed that gap to only to less than 6 million ISK on something that costs 300 million. You know, a 10% margin, I think, is quite often something that I look at as a healthy margin within which there's room to see a certain balance in supply and demand. Here there is clearly a lot of demand at the moment, pushing the prices up, with plenty of sellers as well plugging the gap, but clearly demand is overtaking things as we're starting to see that upwards pressure again. The impact on the skill injectors, the large skill injectors, are continuing their ascent after a hesitation period, you could say, or a flat period of during the month of August, and we've just gone through the 630 million mark at the moment. For the average price, it's 640 million for the sellers, 622 for the buyers. I think this is the highest in buyers that we've seen in quite a while, again forcing those up a little bit, and the volumes are up here very clearly. So this is that trade change. First month of August is in much higher volumes, and now after the summer break, you could say we are starting to see that increased price as well. Small scale injectors should not be able to do something about this trend. We have seen quite a bit of different movements, difference in movements between large and small scale injectors, mostly on that weekly basis. For instance, you can see here large scale injectors, bit of a dump that was quickly recovered in the early stages of August, and then for the most of the month pretty flat. Small scale injectors doesn't have that early August dip, let's say below 130, but has that steady decline throughout the month of August, which at the end there finally started to turn around. But here for these large scale injectors, we have a very significant increase in price, 5-day moving average pulling up quite significantly. So the small scale injectors cannot break this type of a trend, and is doing the same thing, pushing up well above the 130 million mark at this point. Although, yeah, let's see, or is this 125? I'm going to let's see what I can get to view. No, this ought to be 125. Let's see what the average price here is. Yeah, 130, well above the 130 million on average, despite the fact that some sellers are still dumping below 130 million, 122 million for the buyers. Yeah, still very strange. It's got this this slightly different way of responding. I'm guessing that because it is way smaller in amount, that there is more possibility for players to disrupt this market. And here you can see, in my opinion, that some sellers are clearly disrupting this with a little bit of aggressive selling below 130 million, despite seeing where these average prices are. Then we have the daily alpha injectors. Let's see what these are doing. All right, I would say very good news if you're looking for increased alpha activity, increased activity after the summer slump. This is pretty much the chart that you would expect here then, including a little bit of early speculation, you could say, at the end of August. But yeah, mid-June we start to decline. We go back to below 40 million, and on a couple of weeks we managed to get back there, which I always call like, all right, at least there is some activity. It was definitely trading at the lower end of its range. And then late August, potentially also on the tax changes, incentivizing trade. But right now, at the tail end here, pushing back up between 42.5 and 45 million, which I would say is slightly above average on this 1-year chart, and is showing some renewed interest in the daily alpha injectors, going for 43.5 million for the sellers and above 40 million for the buyers as well. Pretty robust demand. I think that this is a play style in EVE Online that a lot of alpha players, free-to-play players do look forward to. Basically a goal that is achievable, a 40 to 50 million payday. Turn that into a daily alpha injector, improve your character, and keep going like that. And then hopefully, of course, during that experience, they find the playstyle that they enjoy, and they can then become Omega or just keep growing their character and enjoy the game as an alpha player. But yeah, pretty decent demand apparently at the moment for daily alpha injectors, followed finally by the hypercores that are also finally stopping that descent. It's probably not too accurate a gauge, because it is tied to a pretty niche hypernet activity in the game, but it's also basically tied to the full economy. This is purely also something that comes from paying CCP, so the supply demand there is purely based on activity in the game as well. And so if we look at it from that perspective, we had more deflationary speculation, you could say, on the market from July down to August. It is the summer slump, so that's definitely a possibility, but here at the tail end we are turning that around on increased volumes as well, pushing price of hypercores to 275,000 and buyers at 265. It's actually a little bit below that for the sellers, but again, buyers pushing the price up, narrowing that margin, and creating these higher average prices with also quite significant volumes at the moment. So this decline in hypercores is stopping as well. Next up, we have the mineral market. Is that complete? That list that looks complete. All right, at 1210. And let's take a look at what's happening here. You may already have seen it from the ticker, but it's not very well visible on the chart. But we're basically back on a downside, a slight downside, of course, for Tritanium, pushing us back below that 4.5 ISK. For the sellers here in JIDA, 438 for the sellers, 429 for the buyers. And you can see here supplies of 250 million at 451, then 155, 66 million. And 154, 443, 41, 40. So there was definitely maybe 500 million units or something like that that have pushed the price back down below that 4.5 mark. And this is really a pattern that we've seen since the industry changes. Obviously, these changes have cost Tritanium dearly. There is just less of it needed in the economy in general. And so around that 4.5 is where we keep hovering, with periods above 4.5, which I would say are good periods to sell. And the market tends to agree with that, because then supply comes in, pushes the price back below 4.5 for the sellers, where they tend to hold off on selling even more. Eventually we get through that, so we push back above 4.5. They're ready with more supplies, crash it back down again, we get back above it, back below, back above, back below. This has really been that trend for Tritanium, pretty stable around 4.5. We never really have massive breakouts or anything like that. I would say that we would need like a resurgence in capital and super capital industry for that to start to take hold, and as we've seen in the previous video with freighters, for instance, we still have a ways to go before industry there starts to make sense. So unfortunately for now, titanium is stuck right pinned on that 4.5 ISK, and this is the trend that we're looking at. The others tended to be a little bit better, although also pretty stable. Of course, pyrite was stable at around that 18 ISK average price. We are now talking 1774 for the sellers, 1717 for the buyers, so a little bit below that 18 ISK mark with decent volumes as well. So clearly a little bit of pressure mounting here on the pyrite market, but overall a very steady range since the start of the summer here as well. Then we've got Mexalon that has a little bit of a volume bump with a slight price bump here as well, but nothing really to write home about. We are still pretty low in price, 59 ISK for the sellers and 58 for the buyers. That's a pretty narrow margin. Look at that supply in the last 24 hours over a full page of Mexalon. The volume's not that great, just like a couple million units tends to be most of these sell orders. Below 10 million in volume per unique order is what we're seeing here in the Mexalon market, but quite a bit of competition. We had this little bit of a bump that is basically again being absorbed very quickly by fresh supply. Any opportunity to sell minerals, at least the high-sec minerals for certain, for just a couple of cents higher tends to be spotted immediately and then plugged by fresh supply. That is the situation. So you're looking at a very stable income for high-sec miners, but not a very high one compared to, let's say, the peak of the April rush, or even the resource scarcity when it was all about when is this going to end? It's never going to end. And then we had capital engagements and things like that as well that would keep bumping the prices up. Those times unfortunately are over. High-sec minerals, well, easy to get, relatively safe to get, and as a result plenty of supply and not that high worth. Then we move on to the low-sec ones. Let's see what Isogen is doing, and all right, very interesting look at the tail end of the chart here. We managed to stay above 60 ISK for pretty much the entire week. We got like one data point down here that's a little bit different, but for the average prices clearly we managed to stay above 60, and we are pulling up in sellers. 80 ISK for the sellers, 63.3 ISK for the buyers. And here, if you look at these volumes, we still have some too high volumes, I would say, for regular Isogen supplies, but it's only 14 million here, 20 million here, and 25 million down here at 100 ISK. And then we go to maybe a little bit speculative to say that 200 million units at 300 ISK would be the normal price, but again, a little bit of it is speculation. CCP is the only ones that really have the full numbers on what's happening with Isogen, but my feeling is that we are starting to chew through those final reserves from the old resource bubble that the CCP had to take care of, and that here for Isogen we are starting to see that, and that these supplies, still a couple of them feel high, but that's way more in line with what we're seeing here for Mexalon, and I honestly think that we should even drop below that for the average volume per sell order. So most of these should be maybe in the 1 to 2 million order, a 50-50 breakdown below a million in regular sell volumes is what I'm personally expecting here, and that should really push the price of Isogen back up, and we are starting to see this in some jolts now, pushed up towards 80 ISK for these sellers, which is today's data point. And you would expect, is this like market manipulation? Probably a little bit, right? Probably someone that came in, bought Isogen up to 80 in speculation of exactly this happening, but you can see it doesn't take that much anymore, right? It's not like you have to buy 100 million units from another player that was still dumping them competitively. before you could make something like that happen. And so these low volumes to make these price jitters happen, I would say, are pretty significant and puts us within that time frame that does make sense. We still have a full quarter where Isogen should feel that problem, should start to feel that problem where we are getting through these reserves, where people that are still holding Isogen are saying, you know, there's really no need for me to dump all of that right now. Let's just slowly wait and then bring in supplies that make sense depending on the needs of the economy, because we could get way higher prices later down the line when that supply finally drops to what it is that is actively being mined by players, and then demand will have to, well, increase their prices, because that's going to be very low if you have to go to low sec in order to get your new Isogen to the markets. And then we will get a chart that looks a lot more like what Noxium is doing, which you know, at going for above 1000 ISK makes it the most expensive Tech 1 mineral sourced from low sec. Definitely an inversion between the way things have always been, you could say, where it was always you know, up to Noxium cheapest, and then Zydrine and Megasite being from nullsec, and Morphite as well, of course, being the most expensive. Here we actually have more significant moves as well, I would say, for Noxium, which is probably normal. It is a lot more risky and hard to get a lot of Noxium to the market, and so it tends to have a more wavy pattern as supply demand needs to find its balance in something that is not that easy to bring in. 1220 for the sellers and 1187 for the buyers as well. Definitely a big difference here as well, which I think should rectify and speaks to my story for Isogen. You can see that we've got 80 ISK for the sellers and 63 for the buyers, so a big margin that has opened up between sellers and buyers. None of the other minerals have that, and especially Noxium price, right? Average price is going to be above 1200 normally, if I can get that to show, is above 1200 at the moment, which is dictated by these sellers, which is normal, of course. If you gotta go into risky space and then import your Noxium into Cheetah, you're not just going to dump to any first buyer that's there. You're going to ask your price. You are the price setter as the supplier. Eventually, those suppliers of Isogen are going to become those price setters as well, and obviously then you have that upwards pressure as well, because who's going to sell cheaply when you can sell more expensively? So yeah, Noxium, definitely a little bit more movement here as well, back to a higher range towards 1250 on the chart, which is very expensive. So keep that in mind. Used to be less expensive by quite a bit than... Oh, Zydrine is gone. There we go. I thought I was missing something. All right. I think I accidentally moved it. Let's add that to the market quick bar again, then moved it to another folder and then just deleted it. But here we go. Next we've got Zydrine, that, yeah, very flat, way more stable and still below 1000 ISK, perhaps at the slightly upwards edge of its bound at the moment, with 913 for the sellers, 890 for the buyers. And then you could say, well, this should be the exact same thing, right? This is coming from nullsec. This needs to be imported from nullsec. And one part of it is definitely true, is that the price is dictated by the sellers. You've got a very narrow margin, and you should get, if we can get 900 to show on the chart here. Yeah, look at that, right? Last week or so, daily averages above 900 ISK. So it's clearly the sellers that are dictating the price for Zydrine as well. But what's the difference is that nullsec is far more organized, has bigger groups, has alliances, non-aggression pacts and things like that, allowing for that far more steady supply. Noxium and potentially Isogen later down the line, those supplies will be blockadable, will be disruptible by pirates, bad events and things like that in a way more significant way. And then we have the, unless of course, you know, nullsec will decide to then fully organize and maybe try to conquer lowsec as well, but that would be an interesting challenge, I think. So yeah, for now, Zydrine very stable above 900, and then we've got Megasite that is actually back below 600 ISK as well. And yeah, Megasite used to be the most expensive Tech 1 mineral, so clearly that lost a lot of its former glory. 595 for the sellers, 567 for the buyers. And you can see those prices touching 600. So again, it's the sellers that are dictating the prices for Megasite as well, but significantly less expensive than Noxium and significantly less volatile in its range as well. So showing that difference, and I would say that this is only the start for Isogen. Now we have a bump up to 80 ISK, which does bring it well above Mexelon. So do expect Isogen to be above Mexelon. What is its normal range? What do I expect? That's very, very difficult to say. But you know, I was sort of laughing at this 200 million units here at 300 ISK down here. But honestly, that may not be that far off. Where was it? Sell order. Oh no, it was not here, but in Isogen. So I was sort of laughing at this one because it feels like that may still be early, especially with 73 days to go, right? Although that does put it close to the end of Q3, but that may not be that wrong considering how high Noxium is. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what Isogen is doing, but so far it is in line with my personal read on the situation, and then my speculation that it is a gauge for CCP to decide on whether or not they can finally end scarcity. Well, there's still stocks out there of Isogen, that there's no doubt about that, but once these dry up, we're not seeing those disruptions from stocks in the other minerals anymore, and that could finally be the time to make that move. Finally, we have Morphite that tried to get back above 100,000 ISK, but is actually pulling back a little bit. 97,000 for the sellers, 93,000 for the buyers. Personal read on this, a little bit of speculation there as well, that new Morphite anomalies are in the works, and that as I've mentioned as well before, with the end of scarcity, I personally don't expect massive sources of Isogen, Megasite or all of these Tech 1 minerals to show up, but a new source of Morphite would definitely make sense considering how expensive it is, like 10x compared to its normal average historical price that I've been used to for Morphite. So that is something that perhaps this is why we won't really, in all likeliness, break out to like a 130,000 or a new 1-year high or anything like that anymore. I don't think the speculators are willing to go towards that anymore, knowing that in Q4 we may get all of those extra supplies and lower prices for Morphite. Next up, we have the PI market at 26.15. There we go. Let's take a look at what's happening with these, and we've got broadcast nodes basically going to a 6-month high, touching 2 million here about a week ago, recovering from that, but we are basically close to 1.9 million for the sellers and 1.7 million for the buyers. And this is, to me, really interesting. We took a look at what's happening with those freighter production costs. It's still not economical, right? Input average cost is still above the expected current average price for a freighter, but I do think that capital production, you know, I've been saying this, why is advanced PI materials doing so well? It is because it's got that extra demand due to capital, and super capital production are requiring this, and we need to eventually find that balance again, and it is going to be twisting and turning on all sides of this industry, both on the resources needed side as well as on the price of the ships themselves, for us to find this balance. And at the moment it does look like upwards pressure for advanced PI materials is what's happening as we are ending the summer. It's definitely, in my opinion, not a coincidence either, and players are starting to, you know, need to build more stuff as well. We are starting to see that upwards pressure in advanced PI materials, which will then eventually drive the prices for those ships up as well. If you want some margin, you need to find it somehow, and this could be how we get there. This is going to, right, granted, this is going to increase the price of input costs again, but I think that this time it will put upwards pressure on the sell price as well here. So very interesting to see this touch 2 million, to make another higher peak, a lower low. Definitely seeing that upwards pressure now that the summer is ending. We will see if that's the same thing for the other advanced PI materials. We've got construction blocks that are settling above 7,000 disc, away from the bottom price, but still very cheap. 7,900 for the sellers, 7,400 for the buyers. This average price, it's actually the buyers that's making this one, so still oversupplied, but at least we got a little bit of a bump here. Consumer electronics is seeing its after summer bump as well. Man, this is making me feel kind of bad, because I was speculating this summer, should we start to buy? In fact, I think I made a video about this, about Inamar as well, and it was like July was the best time to buy, but here for consumer electronics you could have bought mid-August as well, below 5,000 disc, and we are now selling at almost 7,000 disc. Buyers coming in at 6,400. It is possible, if there is going to be more activity, more capital production, more need for advanced PI materials, you are going to see some increased needs for these refined PI materials as well. And so that summer investment could have actually been a good move. I have not bought any PI for this summer. A couple of years ago, I actually burned myself on doing that. But this could be the summer where it happened, and this is another one that's starting to move up a little bit. Coolants is starting its recovery as well, heading back towards 8,000 disc after an August dump where it lost pretty much 30% of its value from 9,000 to 6,000. We're back at almost 8,000 for the sellers, 7,500 for the buyers. I did not expect to see this, but we are seeing a first sign of a turnover in the PI market after the summer. Cryoprotectant solutions, look at these volumes and look at that price response as well. We were back above 100,000 discs, so for this I did mention quite often that if you want to buy some cryoprotectant solutions, even speculatively on implant generation, this has been a couple of months, so you should have cryoprotectant solutions ready and bought well below 100,000 disc at this point. Now they're selling for 113, buyers coming in at above 100,000 as well. So that investment opportunity is clearly over. You're already looking at potentially an easy 15-20% profit on cryoprotectant solutions, and we're just at the start of potentially a trend here. So let's see if it just keeps going. Enriched uranium not moving just yet. I have to say 7,500 lost a little bit less than, let's say, coolants percentage-wise, and is a little bit of a harder to produce one. So 8,000 for the sellers, 7,600 for the buyers. Basically didn't go to a one-year low point or anything like that. Perhaps if we get this general trend, this is still one that you can try to buy though. Then we get the Integrity response drones, not really making a high, but clearly not willing to drop off towards 1.5 million at this point. Almost 1.8 million and 1.85 million very quickly for the sellers, 1.6 billion for the buyers. Bit less demand, bit margin opening up here, putting some slight pressure on the price, but the averages I would say are still quite healthy. Mechanical parts pulling back as well, getting to 7,000 ISK, which is still not great, but we're away from the bottom. 7,150 for the sellers, 6,300 for those buyers. Then we get nanites that went below 4,500. I think I called this as well. Try to buy as close to 4,000 as possible. Look at these volumes. It could be speculation, maybe something in Hobo leaks or something like that is indicating an implant launch, but you know, you guys have had all summer here to be ready for that trade. I told you quite often that you could definitely start to move in, as you could have bought for definitely close to 4K in my opinion. 5,280 now for the sellers, 5,100 for the buyers. Very nice little bump. That's already tradable, but honestly it could just be the start. Then we've got the nano factories. Look at that, making their way back towards a million ISK as well. Above a million for the sellers, just below a million for the buyers. Here is that demand, here is that those buyers pushing the price up, as they want nano factories, as you need it to produce larger ships. And yeah, summer is ending. In fact, this trend started in August already, and a pretty good recovery, going back to a high point for the last 10 months. months or so. Organic mortar applicators, not yet at a million ISK, but you can see that we are not dipping back well below 800,000 at this point. It's almost 900 for the sellers, above 800 for the first buyer here as well. Recursive computing modules still having a little bit of trouble with the chart, but up above a million, almost 1.2 for the sellers and above a million for the buyers as well. Robotics, all right, this one could be very important, although it's still a very small move. This could be the formation of a bottom as well, bouncing up from that 55,000, 57 for the sellers, 56,000 for the buyers. Buyers up just a little bit, but showing that, yeah, that summer slump may just have ended and that we are potentially starting a recovery. I could be completely wrong on that, but I personally do think that advanced PI materials themselves will see that higher structural demand due to the industry changes, and this could be the push that everything else needs as well. Self-harmonizing power cores back on the up as well towards 175 on the chart, 165 for the sellers, but 19 is coming into view on the front page, and 166, look at that margin. So this is basically still a little bit of dumping, but we could get to that 175 very quickly on the sellers, on absorbing anything that's really close to these buyers, showing that demand, there is a willingness to pay more for advanced PI materials. Sterile conduits, very stable, couple of data points at 1.2 million, yeah, almost that for the sellers, above a million for the buyers as well. I think if we look at this half a year ago and even a year ago, I think before this little pull-up, we would have been very happy with 1.2 million for sterile conduits, as we've gone down to 750,000. Then we get the Yukomi superconductors, sort of confirming that trend, still not doing that great, but getting back to 80,000 for the sellers, 69,000 for the buyers. And then we get wetware mainframes, that also up well above 1.5 million, sellers at 1.7, buyers at almost 1.6. On that upward swing, a little bit of pressure here as well. One warning though, I will give you guys this one warning just from my personal perspective. I have not been selling PI in any significant numbers for pretty much the entire summer, and before that I have very big stockpiles ready to take advantage of any of these better prices. Now I make consumer electronics, I make mechanical parts, and I make something else that's not in the list. But yeah, just keep that in mind. I'm not going to be the only one in this situation. I do think across the PI spectrum that there are people licking their chops that are going to be moving their supplies towards trade hubs, and then you could see some pretty significant and fast pressure on these increases in price. But I would say it's not insignificant that pretty much every one of these that we checked here has that post-summer uptick in price, especially quite speculatively in the volumes for those tied to implants potentially. So very interesting. This could be the start of a recovery, but if you're going to gamble and then jump in now trying to buy, that could be a very big mistake, as you know, I didn't see this coming either, but I've got a lot of PI ready as well, despite the fact that I kind of regret not buying some of these at the low points now for the summer in, as always, very small volumes. But yeah, for the stuff that I produce, I am definitely ready to take advantage of these higher prices as well. So yeah, expect me not to be alone. But again, that Q4 horizon for CCP could make sense here as well. Give us another quarter where players start to have that, new industry, have their setup ready, need that extra PI as well if they want. More capitals, more supers in OSEC to create their empires, defend their empires, then they're gonna need more PI, and this is now starting to show up after this summer for the first time. It could be too early to be selling everything. I definitely feel like it is, but it could be the start of a trend. We'll have to keep a close eye on that. Very unexpected, but very welcome in my book. Then we got advanced moon materials coming in at 37.40. All right, looks like it could be a long one, but let's keep going. Crystalline carbonate for Galente. Okay, also not what I expected. I thought that we would start to move in that 150-175 range again, but we just broke out of that back towards 200 disc. We're talking 190 for the sellers, 171 for the buyers. So we're back at a premium for crystalline carbonate, not a spike to 225, which we saw here during the summer, but definitely upwards pressure here as well for our first carbide, and a breakout out of the range that we saw in August, which I thought would basically stabilize back there. Then let's see if the Caldari ones are doing the same. Titanium carbide for Caldari, well, not exactly, but back above 200. Significant volumes here as well. 210 for the sellers, 200 for the buyers, for the first buyer as well, with a decent amount of volume that should keep us in check and should again keep us at a higher range than where we were a year ago. So the premium for carbides, which was dwindling and dwindling as the summer slump was taking shape, is also clearly at least stalling, if not reversing. Then we have the Fernite carbide for Minmetar, and look at that average price heading back for 200 disc here as well. 190 for the sellers, 184 for the buyers. Start of the year below 150 and around the 150 range. So here again, this was looking like lower peaks, bottoms testing 150, testing 150. Now we are pulling back away from that with higher prices and with a premium for carbide, which could be good news for some volatility in Tech 2 ships. Then we've got tungsten carbide that still hasn't confirmed the trend, but is still at a slight premium above 175 here, you could say. We are talking 186 for the sellers, 185 for the first buyer. Demand is back a little bit, I would say, after the summer. So no breakdown back down to 150 or something like that. We played with that very closely at the early August low, but now we are clearly staying above 175. So also not what I expected, right? This was clearly the summer trend, was down, back to that average range, but now demand seems to be picking back up, and we are going to go back into a premium territory for the carbides. Now the metamaterials have not known any of that. They've basically been at a very similar range, very steady range for the whole year. So let's see if they are responding to all of that potentially increased demand and increased activity in the game. Photonic metamaterials for Galente, that's a big no, back at 12,000 disc, right on the average. Not much to say on this. 12,000 for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. If there's one thing to say though, supplies aren't that plentiful, and demand is pushing the price to a very narrow margin yet again. So we may just need a little bit more time to see an upswing in photonic metamaterials. Considering the volumes here, that should definitely be possible, but for now, that one does not confirm the trend price-wise. Then we've got nonlinear for Caldari, which slumped below 20k, is back at 20k. So again, right on the average, 20,000 for the sellers, 18,000 for the buyers. Feels like it is where it should be, and you can see here again we get a little bit of a slight premium period, but honestly all of this is moving nicely around that 20k in a very steady range. So metamaterials so far not really showing that increased that pickup in activity, potentially demand and price. Then we've got plasmonic metamaterials for Minmetar, back down in fact to a lower end of the range, 15,000 on the chart, 16 for the sellers, 15,150 for the buyers. Narrow margin but well supplied, so nothing special here. And then finally terahertz metamaterials also around 15,000 disc. So these just aren't moving that much, slightly higher volumes at the tail end here, but we get a completely different situation with buyers going down to 13,590. Not a lot of demand for terahertz metamaterials. So definitely a different vibe here, but it must be said one of the most stable asset classes, you could say, resource classes over the last year and throughout the entire resource scarcity period. That's definitely been the metamaterials. Then we've got the other advanced move materials that have really not done well, and we're all pretty much all under pressure and getting towards low points. So let's see here again what's happening, and we start off with fermionic condensates. Does look like we get a pickup in volumes and that we are trying to form a bottom. Now, don't rejoice just yet. This could just be a normal market response to a 1-year low point at 50,000. We're back up to 60 for the sellers, buyers at 52,000. That doesn't feel like we're back. Maybe demand is here, activities is all of a sudden surging or anything like that. So could be a monetary fake as well. CCP did inject some ISK into the game, but we'll see. I personally am sort of hoping that, yeah, end of the summer, pick up in activity. Nullsec, they're all establishing themselves, hopefully including industrial processes. That should increase demand across the board and be good for prices if you're looking for higher prices at least. Ferrogel also a tiny bounce from a 1-year low point yet again. Are we back above 30? Yeah, 30,000 for the sellers, 29 for the buyers. So it's a bounce, but it's clearly still very cheap. Then we get Fullerites actually seeing some pressure again. Not a 1-year low point, so definitely slightly different starting point for this one. 700 for the sellers, 650 for the buyers. Still showing basically pressure, cheap prices, above 1,000 ISK. Historically, I'd say that's normal price for Fullerites. Hypersynaptic fibers still going down, 1-year low point right now. 8.6 for the sellers, 8,300 for the buyers. Yeah, should see a 10,000 ISK range, but so this one is clearly saying nope, down to a 1-year low point. Nano transistors very flat over the last week, below 4,000 ISK, which is not great. 3.9 for the sellers, 3.8 for the buyers. Phenolic composites, a little bit of a bump here, but again, this is not enough to say we're in a recovery for these other advanced moon materials. 1,700 for the sellers, 1,650 for the buyers. It's not that bad on this 1-year chart, because here in March, April, right, clearly when CCP announced the industry changes, a little bit extra need for phenolic composites was found, but it's not great either. Then we've got ceramic fibers, same story, right? Clearly March announcement time. Throughout the entire process of the industry changes, we even saw a spike on the introduction, but that was quickly absorbed summertime. We do have higher volumes here again, slightly higher prices, back above the 400 range, I think, for the sellers. Yeah, 415 for the sellers, 376 for the buyers. This is the one indication I would say that, yeah, demand is perhaps picking up, but honestly, this is not where I would put my ISK when it comes to a recovery. I think PI looks far more interesting, but that's just my opinion, of course. Next up, the Tech2 ship market at 45.40. All right, let's see what we can spot here. Nothing to report on the trade, so we're still holding our Kitsune. That is going back up, but I've been trying to sell at 35 million, so this is going to be, which is 33 after tax. So this is going to be my sell order. It's going to be very difficult to trigger, although we're back up at 30 million, so small trade was definitely possible here. And I'm still holding a Manticore at 27, which is just not able to break out above 30 here on the chart. So that's a big no. I'll open up the completed trades just to give us the reference points if needed, but we are in all likeliness still in a different market. These trades were made during like potentially quite volatile periods where I was like, okay, a week, 2 weeks, we can make these trades. I don't think that we're in that market just yet. Basilisk continuing its slow descent down towards 200 million ISK, 210 for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. So you can buy a Basilisk below 200, which on this full chart is not that bad. Yeah. It's possible, but I'm giving that same warning. Don't expect to sell your Basilisk at a 30 million profit by next week. That is in all likeliness not going to happen. We only now have our first indications in the advanced movements with the carbides that potentially some more volatility could be in the works, but that doesn't trigger like right away either. So for now, it's still, in my opinion, look for the best possible deals. A Basilisk below 200 million is not the best, but it's definitely not that bad. Cerberus next actually bumps up and stabilizes between 2 and 250, so that's a big no for me. 225 for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. That's not enough of a margin, and in my opinion you should be looking at buy price below 200 million before jumping in on the Cerberus. Guardian looked pretty interesting last week despite the very average price on the chart of above 190 million. There were not a lot of buyers in there. 196 for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. I think we did acquire some buyers, yeah, a couple here above 180, but this is what I would do as well at the moment. Try to buy as close as possible to 180 million ISK, which is definitely the lower end of the range. And so yeah, this is exactly what I would do as well if I'd be looking at buying a Guardian. Be aggressive with your buy order. Hope that a little bit more supply can keep this pressure on, and then eventually you'll be able to trigger and you'll get a cheap one with that exact same warning. Just look at the decreased volatility. Don't expect a very quick turnover. This is more of a medium-term investment, hoping again maybe by the end of Q3 or something like that, increased activity, nice winter announcement, some speculation, and then hopefully some null-sec action, something like that. You do need an outside something to trigger your sell opportunity, where here this was pure market speculation, in-game activity, things like that was tradable, that allowed me to do a buy at 185 and a sell at 200. So you're buying below my jumping point, not by too much after taxes anymore, but yeah, this was all of these trades again done very quickly. Here at the moment, don't expect that to happen. I'm actually looking for buy opportunities in these stealth bombers. You can see here mid-August we clearly had one as we jumped down to less than 22.5, but now stabilized above 25, so that's not that great. 26.4 for the sellers, 23.6 for the buyers. You can buy below 25 million, but on this chart that's not where I want to make my move. Right here is basically where you want to try to buy. Ikitursa for Triglavian, all right, very interesting as well in my opinion. I am keeping an eye on this as I love Triglavian and Edencom stuff. Actually pretty exotic, definitely quite unique, and to see this price drop off again is quite nice. We are talking 625 million now for the sellers, 550 for the buyers. That's definitely a pretty sharp drop off, and I'm going to say here, although this is a guess on my part as well, that there is a little bit of speculation in this, that part of the Q4 end of scarcity could also hit Triglavian ships and the Edencom ships, although I do think that CCP will be happy to keep those at a pretty big premium, making them very expensive, and basically be a little bit of a carrot, an expensive carrot for Omega to entice players that, all right, you want the trick stuff, you want that really cool stuff. It's very expensive, it's very risky, that makes it EVE, that makes loss meaningful, but if you're looking for a chain weapon, then you are going to have to be Omega and you're going to pay the ISK, but that pressure here could be a little bit of speculation or just stabilization in the supply chains for trick stuff. Then the Ishtar, again stabilizing just below 230 million ISK. We'd need to be buying well below 200 million before I would jump in. 213 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. Too narrow a margin and not in the right range. We are seeing quite high volumes, so there is some speculation, but unfortunately you could say here these increased volumes have decreased volatility for the price ranges. So that's another no. Manticore did jump down to less than 25 million, and here my holding, basically I bought too early, and the jumps aren't enough. 29 for the sellers, 26 million for the buyers. Definitely again not the best place to jump in. The Munin, that's a misclick. The Munin seeing a little bit of pressure. Average price is now below 200 million. 197 for the sellers, 190 for the buyers. Yeah, again, no. Honestly, here could have probably bought below 180, here below 180. So I'm waiting again for a 1 year low point before I would buy a Munin. Nemesis flat on 25. You can't do anything with this. 25 for the sellers, 23 for the buyers. That's a no. Definitely need to be close to 20 before we jump in on this one. Onero's next, slowly working its way back towards 200 million ISK. One sell coming in at 186. Our buyers at 179. You're buying close to 180. Jesus, yeah, maybe if you absolutely need to. So far, logistics cruisers look like they don't have the demand, and that you can be aggressive there. If you get a pickup, that could be interesting, although it's still not that great, let's be honest. Then we get the Panther stabilizing, so 125 billion. Expensive, 1.3 for the sellers, almost 1.3 for the buyers. Not battleships, in my opinion, not enough volume to speculate into, but using that as a gauge for average cost. For now, it looks stable. Again, I think advanced movements could start to push this up. Then we get the Purifier, which here mid-August, that was very clearly a jumping point, and we actually have our first touch of volatility back up to 30 million, 25 million for the sellers. Average price at these bottom ranges for 23 million, so that was definitely a trade that you could make, a 1 month trade, and the first one, in fact, in this entire category, where you're saying, all right, 23 to 30 million, that's tradable, this is some volatility, this is testing this high here as well, so giving me that slight bit of hope that eventually we will see volatility come back into the Tech 2 markets and the advanced movements, and this one, the first couple of signs that that may be in the works. Scimitar just straight up stabilizing at 200 million, sellers just below 200, buyers 189. That's again way too narrow a margin, not the best time to jump in. Widow stabilizing 125 billion, so again expensive but nothing too crazy here. And then the Zealot is pretty cheap, but again on these volumes I'd never buy more than one. 184 for the sellers, 179 for the buyers, so you are buying below 180. That's another yes, if you want to do a Tech 2 purchase, right, then buy one Zealot now and wait for that to eventually do another one of these spikes. But again, won't be next week. You need patience at the moment in the Tech 2 ship markets. Then we get Tech 3 ships coming in at 54.45. Like that, as always, we'll start with the destroyers, with the Confessor stabilizing above 50 million, very expensive. We didn't see any real supply last week. 51 for the sellers, 48 million for the buyers, and we do have some supply over the last couple of days, including 44.39. Feels like that's going to put some pressure on the price, but yeah, we're above 50, so that's kind of normal. And my speculation on this was, of course, that we have a trade opportunity last week in the Zwepel. So then we've got the Hecate that is still staying well above 50 million as well, selling for 53 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers, and supply wise 30 plus ships in the last 24 hours. Not that much in between this, so these are only starting to pick back up again. Could be good news for the Zwepel, which is what we're looking for. Then the Jackdaw back up above 50 million as well. 54 in fact for the sellers, 50 million for the buyers, driving a lot of the volumes. Look at that, last 24 hours, half a page, but over 100 Jackdaws trying to take advantage of that very best price. And now let's see if I was right or not. This should drive Zwepels up, and it is still not doing that. So far I've been absolutely wrong, but all the other destroyers are above 50 million ISK. Zwepel selling for 43 million supply wise, nothing in the last 24 hours. 41 million for the buyers. This may have gone up, I think. Yeah, this has probably gone up a little bit, closing that gap, but this still feels very cheap. Honestly, if you can grab a Zwepel, it is slightly speculative because the volumes in all of these from a lot of these single orders are significant. 20-30 plus of these ships, that is definitely a lot of them. But the price difference is 10 million between Confessor and Zwepel. So if you're looking PVB wise, I think the Zwepel is a very interesting proposition that could shoot up in price by at least 5 million or something like that decently quickly. So it still has not materialized, but I personally feel like it's still primed for a Zwepel push up and could potentially be an interesting jumping point. Then we've got the cruiser. Here is the Legion, flat at slightly higher price, which is normal. This is the premium that we're paying for the removal of skill point loss. 192 for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. It's a decent margin, but not something I would speculate on at the moment to make us money. Then we've got the Loki, seeing a little bit of pressure back below 200 million ISK, 205 for the sellers, 188 for the buyers. All right, you buying a Loki below 190 million? Maybe it's a little bit too early though, so we could test that 180 with a bit more momentum, so I'd be patient there. Then we've got Proteus flat at 180 on this chart. That's not where I want to make a move. 184 to 170 for the buyers. It's pretty low, but in my opinion still not low enough. And then the Tengu is slowly starting to slow down its descent as well. Currently selling for 190, buyers at 175. If you have to make a purchase, right, 175 is below all of this. Then it would be try to buy one Tengu as close as possible to 175 million. I do think that could make sense. It's just a great hull as well, so it could still be useful if you need to trade that into that. But overall, yeah, weird how this Vapel is just holding on to that such a lower range than all of these other destroyers that are finally seeing the volume. So over the last week, this was all still like, that's not a lot of volumes for these high prices. We are starting to see them here, but they haven't pushed the Vapel up, which I personally think should happen eventually. And the others, yeah, maybe you could buy a Tengu, but keep in mind that's gambling. Tech 3 cruisers is the gambling market in my opinion. And then finally we've got the extra product for the week, and for this one I am choosing a rig category, engineering rigs. So that's coming in at 59.15. I think pretty general category, useful in any ship really. So let's see, that's in module modifications. We get rigs and we've got engineering rigs. We start with the small ones. Just gonna take a feel as to what's happening with these at the moment. So Tech 1. Slight bump late August and slightly above average, I would say, going for 660, 589. That's not that expensive. Actually inexpensive capacitor control circuits, command processors, pretty average. The April bump, a slight bump here late August again, but nothing too crazy in the ranges. So all of that feels, yeah, pretty cheap. Then we'll take a quick look at Tech 2. So a lot of these don't really have that much in volumes either, pretty cheap. Memory cells as well. So the current router Tech 2 under pressure, alright, below 3 million ISK, definitely decently cheap on this chart. Small capacitor control circuit making its way back from very cheap late summer right here as well, going for an average price of 2.6 million, quite doable. Egress port cheap as well. Small liquid electronics, a little bit of bumping on a volume here, but yeah, it's just not enough trade volume to really say that that's anything sustainable. Small power grid subroutine maximizer 2 starts at 2.5 million, selling for 2.7 million. You know, someone tried something because it's possible on these tiny volumes, but that's going to be plugged very quickly again. Pressure here, very general. Cheap, small engineering rigs is my read on this one. Then we'll take a quick look at the medium ones. Seeing pressure, but slightly above average price, you could say, since April for the medium Tech ones, so, ancillary current rather. Capacitor control circuit though, very cheap, well below 1 million ISK. Command processor, let's see if we can get that on the chart, above 500,000. But that's still not what I would call expensive. Alright, slight upswing, but terrible volumes here. Again, quickly recovered. 25 million, really? That's 25. Alright, medium power grid subroutine maximizer 1 going for 25 million. But again, this is just a manipulation attempt. Give that a little bit of time. In fact, nobody's buying anything at this price anyway. This is just gonna get plugged very quickly. Cheap, below 200,000. Definitely cheap as well. The Tech 2s, let's see if anything is happening here. Medium ancillary current router has the volumes to be a pretty good price. Is 22 million. Slightly above average, nothing too major. Capacitor control circuit going for 8.3 million, slightly above average. So that's kind of interesting, right? Going from cheap in the small ones, and then the Tech 2 medium ones seem to be slightly above average to average for the tiny volume ones, of course. But we can go through these. Processor overclocking unit is actually pretty cheap at the moment. 3 million, not a lot of buyers. And then the semiconductor memory cell is, yeah, again, slightly above average, but no crazy 20 million prices or anything like that. Then we've got the large ones. Let's take a look at the tech ones for these. And another August bump that is being absorbed quite steadily, but clearly above average on this one. Capacitor control circuits actually really low, very cheap, less than 2.5 million at the moment. Command processor, again, we're going back for the bad volumes, so it's going to be a little bit harder. Another September bump here, terrible volumes, not much to see, terrible volumes. What's that price? Below 1 million? Yeah, that feels like it's pretty cheap at 850. Right, semiconductors, all right, and then the Tech 2 ones. So large engineering rigs, I mean, we get a summer, an August bump that's being absorbed. All of this feels like it's affordable. Ancillary current router, volume increase, and we do see a price increase here that's a little bit more significant. Sellers coming in at 100 million, buyers at 93. So that is basically a summer slump that is ending. Capacitor control circuits, all right, 35 million. Right, 32 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. Buyers are back here as well. Clearly the end of the cheap summer here is over. We're back at, well, normal. I would start to say perhaps even slightly above average prices. Egress port maximizer 2, same story, right? End of August, bumping back to 25, and at the moment we're potentially getting back above that on a couple of days, or the current sellers are coming in at 23 million. Expensive again. For the cooled electronics, subroutine maximizer had this crazy bump, but yeah, this is just terrible in volumes, although they're picking up here again at the tail end, and prices pushing back up on the average. Definitely expensive, decently expensive for the overclocking unit, Tech 2, large Tech 2, and then again an upswing at the tail end for the large semiconductor memory cell 2. So here I am reading increased interest and demand for these Tech 2 large rigs that are pushing these prices to average and above average prices here again. And finally the capital ones, this could be like really bad in volumes, but we'll take a quick look. Ancillary current router Tech 1, actually expensive already, right? Going for 100 million. That's definitely expensive. Capacitor control circuits are all cheap, right? Going for 10 million. That's a crazy difference right there. And then we're in the terrible volumes. So here it's pretty obvious that we can't make any sense of these types of charts. All right, finally the semiconductor memory cell, pretty cheap. 30 million, definitely below average. And then on the Tech 2s, it's going to be a little bit hard to read this as well, but capital and ancillary current routers feel cheap. Actually, on this chart, 300 million. Do we have sellers? Well, 400 million. So still a big premium there. Capacitor control circuits, better trade volumes, selling for 150. Terrible volumes, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, and nothing to see here. All right, pretty interesting. Capital ones can't say much. Large ones, I would say we are seeing that recovery end of summer, especially in the Tech 2 ones. Mediums are just slightly expensive. I think cruisers are of course quite in vogue still for exploration. It's what I tend to fly quite often. You also have the Abyss, and then small engineering rigs, they actually tend to be pretty cheap. I would say probably because frigates have become really cheap as well, and despite that we're not seeing super increased demand of that just yet. But that's the read here for the engineering rigs, which to me is a little bit of a read for the general situation in the rigs market. Definitely not seeing extremes any which way in those at the moment. And that will be it for this iftar, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys next time.